This is the Dick, Cliff, and Gene show. Okay. We've got two middle-aged guys and one elder here.
I'm the near elder.
To reminisce about how they all came to be involved in emergency medicine.
So what do you want the world to know about? Why did you do it? How did it all start?
Well,
what made you think about it?
All right, when I came to medicine, it was by a circuitous route. World War II, 4 years, 42 to 46. Engineering, electrical engineering at Cornell. And my junior year, I thought first about medicine. And I talked to the dean of the electrical engineering school, and the dean said, I've had one other electrical engineer go into medicine. He's down at the Cornell Med Center, and why don't you go down and talk to him? He had graduated in 1928.
Very cool.
So I went down there and I met the guy, Bill Gahegan. He was a professor at the Cornell Med Center. And Bill said, very nice guy. He said, you've only got a few months and you'll have your degree. Go ahead and get your degree and work for a year and see how it goes. I thought that was good sense. So I got my degree, and it was February of 1949. And there was a big slump post-war in 49. I walked the streets for 6 weeks, filling out applications, trying to get a job. I finally got a job with the Staten Island Edison Company on Staten Island, which me, a kid from Missouri, southwest Missouri.
Where are you from?
I was from Clinton, Missouri, population 5,000. You were from Wichita, it's a big city.
Yeah.
You grew up?
Up and down the East Coast, Norfolk, Virginia, mainly in Florida, Fort Lauderdale.
Okay. Was your dad military?
He was Navy man.
How did I know that?
My dad was in the Army in World War II.
Yeah, but you moved around.
We moved around, so you know.
Military people move around.
All move around, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
So anyway, so I got my job with the Edison Company, and I worked as an electrical engineer for 6 years. Now I'm 30 years old. And in 1954, I was 30, and you did not get in medical school very easily as an older applicant.
Right.
And I decided it's now or never, I'll try it. And so I told my boss that I wanted to go to medical school. And it was on a Sunday. I had asked to see him, and he knew it was something pretty dire that I would bother him on a Sunday morning. And so I really liked the guy, and he really was good to me. And I told him my story. And he said, let me ask you one question. I thought, oh man, here it comes. He said, what can I do to help you out?
Wow.
I nearly fell out of my chair. So I went to summer school. I went to NYU downtown. I remember my organic chemistry class, which I had to take, had about a couple of hundred students, and they were all pre-med. And they all needed A's.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And
Quite a curve.
I had never met competition like New York City in little old Clinton, Missouri. But And I got turned down. I put in 13 applications, and I got turned down several without an interview. And I interviewed in Syracuse, University of New York at Syracuse. And there were about 6 of us, 5 young guys, and me. There weren't many girls at that time.
Almost none were there.
Almost none. And so a secretary came out and gave us each a yellow pad and a pencil and said, write in 300 words or less why you want to go to medical school. And the 5 young guys said, this is juvenile. This is ridiculous. We've already filled out our application. Not Gene Nagel. I was writing my heart out on that yellow pad.
Now, do you think your life experiences and having done something before you went to medical school enabled you to do that better? Because you made a different
Desperation made me do better. I wanted in. And I got interviewed by an old. Now, what does the word old mean to you?
89 to 100.
Nah.
At that point, it means about 40.
It means 10 years older than
10
you
years
are.
older.
That's all.
That's right.
That's old.
That's right.
And he was old. He was about 60s. And nice guy. And I went home to New York City. And a few weeks later, I get a letter. It's another rejection, I think. You have been accepted to the medical class in 1955 at Syracuse. And I tell, very often I'll tell people that it was the happiest moment of my life, which of course doesn't make my wife happy. At any rate, she's used to me. And I went down to Washington University, St. Louis. And I wanted to go there, and I can't really tell you why, but it was a good medical school. Syracuse is a good medical school. And so it's May of 55. And I am being interviewed by a 6-foot, 2 or 3 inch surgeon, arrogant, but then I'm repeating myself,
By the time
named Barb Miller, full professor of surgery, and a little pediatrician with a little bow tie and white buck shoes. And the registrar is an older guy sitting there. He's also an MD. And the little pediatrician starts out with a question that I didn't really fully understand. And I'm trying to make sense of it and say something. And Barb Miller leans over and he goes on the table. Inkwell flies in the air. Little pediatrician almost gets incontinent. And Barb Miller said, were you in the military? And this is 1955.
Yeah.
I said, yes, sir. He said, I don't suppose you got to Korea. That's the first time I heard the fife and drum. I said I wasn't in that war. Well, it kind of startled him. I got into Washington U.
That's great.
Now, that's in May of 55. Fast forward, it's now October in St. Louis. October in St. Louis, it's a rainy weekend. When it rains in Missouri, it rains for 3 days. And so it's a gloomy 7 o'clock, foggy, rainy, and I'm crossing the street from eating at the hospital to coming back to study. As I'm crossing the foggy street, this big hulk passes me, and he turns around and he said, hey, I turn around, it's Dr. Barb Miller, the 6'2" surgeon. He comes near me like I'm a bug.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "You're that older one, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, how are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm not setting the world on fire, but I'm in the middle somewhere." He turned and walked off, and over his shoulder he said, "Hell, I didn't think you'd win the Nobel Prize."
Pretty cool.
Anyway, it is 1962. I go to Miami. I'm working in Jackson Memorial Hospital. I get married, number one. We're living in a little one-bedroom condo unit, and my wife's an ex-nurse. She got pregnant right away, and there's a cardiac arrest in the building. And somebody else, doctor, and I go out, and I go down a few floors. We're on the 11th floor. Somewhere below me, guy is overweight, middle-aged guy. And I start mouth to mouth. Another doctor comes up. He does mouth to mouth. I do closed chest. CPR only started in 1960. So this is 63. And the fire squad comes. 3 guys from the Miami Fire Department. And the lieutenant is Lieutenant Ken McCullough, 6'2", 210, what I always wanted to be. You too, probably.
Sure.
Skinny little guy.
We wanted to play football.
Yeah, right. And I said, "It's no use." And he had vomited, he had aspirated, there was no pulse, and so forth. And so Ken said, McCullough, the lieutenant, said, "No matter what we do, they all die." Well, in the hospital, occasionally, we would resuscitate somebody. And back in those days, the drugs were calcium chloride, or carbonate, epinephrine, bicarbonate,
Right.
and defibrillate. And the defibrillation in 63, 4, 5, physio-controlled DC defibrillators were not common yet. I think physio started around 65, 66. There were some other manufacturers, Men in Great Brock, Corbin Farnsworth, Mind Safety. There were some other DC defibrillator. Anyway, so I said to the lieutenant, "Can I come down to the fire station, like on Saturday when I'm off?" "Sure." So I went down there on Saturday. These guys did not need for me to teach them CPR. They knew. And we talked, and I thought, they're bright, they're motivated, and they're the only people on the outside. If you stop a doctor on the street, he may be a psychiatrist or a dermatologist.
Well, it's like the doctors in the emergency,
Yeah.
such as they were in the emergency room.
Oh, there was, ER docs hadn't started.
There were any ER
That was
doctors.
called the Pontiac plan.
Let me digress a minute.
No plan.
When you're 89 years old, you better jump on a thought while you have it, because it'll be gone if you don't. The ER, that was the nicest term for it, because it often was called the pit.
Still is.
And the doctors that staffed the ER were on rotation, and they hated it. And they, kicking and screaming, they came into the ER.
Right.
for their night.
Part of
And
the medical staff obligation
Yeah,
is to take
and
vacation.
they're only there once every 2 months, but still, they would bitch and moan about it. So, I thought primarily of cardiac arrest in those early days. I wasn't thinking particularly of trauma or other modalities. And I thought there's only a couple of drugs that we commonly use. We defibrillate. And these guys, they can probably do it. And so we started to talk of that. And the fire chief was very proud of the fact that Miami had a #1 rating by the insurance industry as a fire department. Now the #1 rating means that you got fire hydrants wherever they're supposed to be. You've got fire stations scattered around.
Right.
You've got a response time of so much. I don't know everything to know about ratings, but it means you've got the lowest insurance cost, fire insurance cost, that you can have.
Right.
He's very proud of that. And he didn't want anything to affect that. And they only had the one rescue truck. And he was very wary of me. I'm a do-gooder. And you know what do-gooders often do.
You're a scary guy.
Oh, they often muck up the situation terrible. Yeah. They might think they're doing good, but they're not. But anyway. But over the years, with the Miami Fire Department, we were looking primarily at cardiac arrest. And it didn't occur to us at that early time about EMS, generalized emergency care.
Didn't exist.
And some milestones along the way. In 1966, the government formed the National Highway Safety and Transportation Agency. They had 13 standards. Ding, 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 ding. I can't name them in order, but #1 is seat belts. Don't hold me to these, but #2, crash barrier. If there's an off-ramp, there's some crash barriers there in case you do something wrong. There is automobile construction, crash safety. They would crash cars into concrete barriers at 15 miles an hour. And whatever. So there are 13 of them. #11 is EMS. And although the other branches had hundreds of employees, EMS had 3. It had a retired Marine Corps colonel, the head of it. Joe Stepney was his secretary aide guy. And they decided, we'll put a helicopter guy in because Coast Guard helicopters can carry emergency cases, okay? So they put Captain John Waters into that position. He promptly retired in disgust from the Coast Guard. I'm not going to be with that Mickey Mouse outfit there in highway safety. And he became Duval County's public administrator and one of the early EMS things. Okay. Anyway, and the colonel, the Marine Corps colonel, the head of it, he hated another EMS figure so bad, Peter Saffer.
Oh,
Really?
He hated him so bad.
Why?
Well, Saffer, did you know Saffer?
I didn't know, but his
Yeah.
books, he said that, I mean, he's
Saffer,
the guru of CPR,
oh he is.
the guru of survivability, and the
Oh,
things
yeah.
he did on dogs, it's still 50, 60 years later, we're still going back and learning.
There's Germany, okay? They're ordinary people. There's Austrians.
Right?
They speak German.
But they're
They're higher.
aristocratic.
And Saffer was way up there among the Austrians. Okay? He was a close friend of mine. He was arrogant. Okay?
I still have his book, his first book he wrote. It's kind of,
Yeah,
it's still a Bible.
I know. And the Marine Corps colonel, he tolerated arrogance poorly. Okay.
Being a Marine Corps colonel.
Okay. And I was the second guy to come in front of him, and he thought I was less arrogant, and I got some early funds from Highway Safety. My first significant grant, really. And I bought a defibrillator from a new company, Physio Control, and we shook it to pieces in 2 weeks' time. And I sent it back to Seattle in a body bag, and I got a new one that was properly put together, meaning all of the screws and washers were lip-tolled. It's a plastic. And all of the sensitive things were shock mounted, and it was a good defibrillator. And so now we had a defibrillator. I needed the fire chief was okay with defibrillation.
And this was
CPR.
an AC or DC defibrillator?
These were DC.
Okay.
There were 4 DCs at that time. But Gordon Farnsworth was Mickey Mouse. It was dry cell batteries. Men in Great Bach, too heavy. Mine Safety, way too heavy, 50 pounds. So Carbon, the Physio was the best unit. Now I want to start IVs. And the fire chief, with great guy, the fire chiefs at Miami, by and large, deserve to be at their level.
Because they were visionaries, because they allowed the change to take place?
The chief did not want any blot on his career. So as long as I did not create something in the newspaper that would embarrass him, he was cool. But God help me in those early days if I had come a cropper, okay? So I wanted IVs, and he said, you'll have to go in front of the Miami City Commission. So we go down to Dinner Key, and there are 5 commissioners, and the 5 commissioners in the building sit up on a dais. Big table, beautiful, ornate table. They all have big chairs, bigger than this. And big high back leather, expenses, no problem,
right.
if you're a commissioner. And then we're down here on the lower level, peons, okay?
They still do that.
And so I said to the 5 commissioners, we need to have IVs. I said, if a doctor were to come along on the street, it could be a dermatologist, it could be a psychiatrist, it could be a veterinary medicine, who knows, and may or may not be skilled at what we need. I want these 6 officers who've been trained to be allowed to use their training And I said, I will be the cardiac arrest. And I climbed up on the table and laid down. And I said, I have now suffered a cardiac arrest. And Lieutenant Ken McCullough, the big guy that I'd met in the building, is called and he's going to start an IV. Well, you know Chelcos, you know Intercasts. We didn't have those.
Right.
He had an 18 gauge steel needle.
Uh-huh.
Bingo, in the vein.
Who fainted?
And it's dripping. And I said, I would rather have a trained individual like this fire lieutenant than just any passerby. And they said it's okay. So now we had IVs. The fire chief didn't give a damn what you stuck in the IV. It could be Santa Flush. It could be cyanide, or whatever.
But did you?
Once the IV is there, what you stick in the rubber cap, who
Right,
cares?
right.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
So now we had medication. Okay. And things are going along.
Well, what medications did you use then?
The three: calcium, epi, and bicarb. Okay. Now we get to innovation. And he told me no. And so that's when Harry Heinich and I sprayed each other with 5% cocaine. And 6 officers intubated me, 6 officers intubated Harry. And, well, I intubated Harry first, and he intubated me first. And so then the next morning at 9 o'clock, I go to Dinner Key, not to Dinner Key, but to the fire chief station on number 1, fire station number 1. And I see Larry Kenny. And I said, Chief, this is what we did. God damn it, Nagel, he said. I told you no innovations. I said, Chief, they all did it perfect. All right. They will be allowed to innovate and try one time. And if they don't get the tube in, bag and mask into the hospital. I said, fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we started
That's
innovation. Okay.
What year was that?
1969.
69 now. Okay.
So in 69, Seattle started, Los Angeles, Columbus, St. Vincent's, with mobile coronary care and riding a doctor, like Pantridge did in Ireland.
Right.
Miami, we started with no doctor and telemetry. So they would send us an EKG, and we could talk to the firemen on the scene.
Tell a little bit about the telemetry. Were you working with Jim Hirschman at that point, or you did it?
Jim and I were together.
Right.
From about 66 or 7 right on.
So you were already working on the telemetry
Yeah.
piece?
And how did you do that?
Okay. First, I contacted RCA, Zenith, Motorola, because we had a space program going on. Telemetry was not new.
Right.
The space program used to, anybody that went up had EKGs coming back and voice coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And those companies couldn't have been less interested. Space was big money.
Mm-hmm.
And what I wanted, it didn't look like any business at all. And a little company, Biocom, was in California. And they made a little modulator so that a person at home could send an EKG by telephone to their doctor if he had a demodulator and could write it out. And so Biocom said, well, we can make that. And they sent me a couple of units. Didn't work worth a hoot because the radio, it wasn't telephone. The radio completely blanked out the unit with radio RF.
Okay.
And so they went back to the drawing board. built a unit that would work
Shielded.
and shielded, block out the radio. And that's what we used. And so we had good voice communication, good EKGs, but we needed a direct line from the scene over the fire department radio to Jackson Memorial Hospital. And what I needed was a telephone line from the fire department communication headquarters to Jackson Hospital, a dedicated line to the recovery room
Right, I remember.
module. Okay. And so I told the phone company, they said, you're going to have to wait because we're behind in installing. And it's a 3-month wait. That was the Miami office. Southern Bell. Southern Bell was in Florida, Alabama, and Georgia, as I remember one other state. Anyway. So I look up Southern Bell, and their headquarters is in Birmingham, I think, or Alabama somewhere. So I dial the number. See, when you grow up in a small town, you're not afraid of big cities and bureaucracy. I dial it, and by God, a guy answers on the second ring. And I said, I'm calling from Miami. I'm a Dr. Gene Nagel. He said, I've forgotten his name. I'm Vice President of Southern Bell, Joe Montgomery. I said, Joe, I'm happy to meet you. And I told him what it was that we needed. This was like on a Monday or a Tuesday. He said, I'll be in Miami on Thursday. How about you have lunch with me at the Everglades Hotel? It's the top of the hotel. And I said, great. So on Thursday, he and I are we meet at 11:30 or something like that. And he said, now, the local executives will be coming in here. And he said, we won't tell them what we're doing. I said, okay. So 3 guys come in, ties, suits, looking important, and they see Montgomery. And they all come over and they kiss his ring. He's the vice president from the big headquarters. And they look at me as if, who are you? And Joe doesn't tell him. Introducing me, but he didn't tell him. And he said, after we have lunch, he said, I think you'll get some action this afternoon. And this afternoon, I get a call that afternoon. And they said, where do you want the line?
That's pretty cool.
And we were in business, okay?
That's so cool.
Now, the head of Jackson Memorial Hospital was a Dr. Kermit Gates. He died during the buildup of this. But the next guy, Bill Nordwall, could not have been nicer to me. And the telephone line and the central in the recovery room, whatever. He said, it's fine with us. So I had fairly smooth beginnings. Now let me tell you the worst hour in Miami. We're swimming along. The media, the Miami News, the Miami Herald, the radio stations, Channel 4, TV. Boy, we had press every week. It was wonderful. And the public, the Florida Heart Association, we could not have been given more support.
Because they wanted to see the idea work, or it wasn't working.
It was working, and it just was the right time for the public.
Space technology brought home.
Yeah, the public was tired of Vietnam. We had the riots in Miami in '69. This is now 70, 71. It was swimming. And it's 9 o'clock in the morning, and Chief Kenny gets me on the phone and he said, "Did you read this morning's paper?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "I will be over at Jackson Hospital in 15 minutes. He brings the papers. There is a columnist, whether it was the news or I think it might have been the Miami News, because Bill Roberts had a column, I think, on the local section of the Miami News. And that morning, it said, "The Miami Rescue Squad attended a serious medical incident at Joe Smith's home," and in spite of a doctor being on the scene, they took poor Miss Jones to the hospital, or Mr. Jones to the hospital, wouldn't allow his wife to ride along. His billfold got stolen.
Y'all probably stole it.
And he died. And isn't this awful? Now, Bill Roberts looked like a middle linebacker for the Dolphins. Crew cut, tough-looking guy. And I've got 3 lieutenants at that time. And Tommy, I've forgotten his last name, Tommy was not that well educated and did not speak like a gifted orator. But Chief Kenny said, if I had a problem, I'd rather have Tommy on the scene than anybody. Cool under fire. And Tommy comes in, and the chief come in the office. And the chief said, "What happened?" Tommy said, "Well, we attended the cardiac arrest. And the guy had no activity. And we started CPR, started an IV. You didn't always get an IV going on somebody who is in arrest.
That's right.
Had an IV, gave some drugs, had some ventricular fib activity, defibrillated, had a pulse, and the wife came in, and an elderly doctor with Parkinsonism, and wanted to know what's going on. And we were worried about him falling down and having a fractured hip or something. And we offered to let him ride in the ambulance with us to the hospital, but he refused. We got to the hospital, and we had, like usual, all of the effects we had in a bag, which we gave to the ER. And he didn't make it, and not all of them made it, and that's it. I said, "Tommy, let you and I go talk to Bill Roberts." So we went down to the newspaper, and we laid it out, and the next day in Bill Roberts' column, well, I talked to the lieutenant so-and-so and the Dr. Nagel, and this is what happened. And if I had a cardiac arrest in Miami, I hope that same squad takes care of me.
Well, that's awful nice of him.
Yeah.
And there was really...
Yeah. And that was the darkest moment. Okay. What else?
Interesting.
That's great.
You know, we all had a lot of history with EMS, and as we get older, we think that the younger people aren't doing anything different. Do you have any idea of what you think the next big issues might be for people to face, for people to try and solve?
Well, you two are both emergency medicine physicians, okay? And that specialty came along because it needed to come along, okay? But also, your pioneers was a doctor in Kansas City, in Pontiac, Michigan, Alexandria, Virginia. And those three guys, those three doctors, started what we now know as emergency medicine. And you definitely fill the need. Before that, the ER, ED, whatever you want to call it, was a wasteland. And so that was a significant event. And then you got accepted as a specialty. You had teaching programs. And pretty soon you had some of the best students from the medical schools going into your specialty. You had achieved, I think, a significant role in medicine, not just emergency medicine. I once wrote an editorial in one of the throwaways about corporate emergency medicine, and it wasn't all complimentary. And I think that what AMR did in pre-hospital care, what corporate medicine did in emergency department care, some of it was good, not all of it was good. I think the standards, by and large, are well established, and the guidelines and the principles, I think you guys protect. So I think it's on an even keel now. You asked me an interesting question. Down the road. All right. Down the road, we have $16 trillion of debt. We have doubled the national debt in the last 6 or 8 years. Okay. We're headed to 20 trillion. I think we'll get it.
I agree.
And unfortunately, not many people really understand how devastating that is.
Okay. What it means to me, an 89-year-old, is the dollar isn't going to be worth near as much. So, what you've seen in terms of devaluation of your savings account is nothing. Because, fortunately for the United States, Europe and the rest of the world is in nearly as bad a shape as we are. So, we haven't seen the devaluation yet, but we will eventually. There are some practices in medicine that could be improved. The cost of medicine is out of sight. How much is the hospital's fault? How much is the practitioner's fault? I don't know. But it's both of us. And in the emergency medicine field, which both of you are involved in, and I used to be, there are some practices that could be trimmed. Dual response with a high-priced fire engine makes no sense at all, except it allows fire chiefs to buy additional equipment and have bigger budgets.
Right.
And I think that'll change. And whether, since every just about every major American city, EMS is dominated by the fire department. There are some cities with independent EMS, AMR,
Right.
mainly. But there's an experiment down in Louisiana, Acadian, that is similar to the Florida grocery store Publix. And that is, Publix is employee owned and operated. And Acadian Ambulance now has 4,000 employees. And Acadian Ambulance is 85% employee owned. And they used to have 7 helicopters and 2 fixed wing. It's got to be more than that now. When the oil pipeline from Alaska was built, they wanted EMS on the pipeline for 2 years. Acadian, bid on it
Right.
and got it.
Supplied.
And they supplied EMS on the Alaskan pipeline. They bid and got the contracts for what is called advanced paramedic aboard a platform on the Gulf. And the platforms, the biggest platforms, may employ 700 people. They're there for 2 weeks and off for 2 weeks. The paramedics, the advanced paramedics, can take x-rays, prescribe drugs, simple drugs, do sick call, and they eliminated 70% of the transfers from the platform, 30, 40, 50 miles, back to a tertiary care hospital. And they are connected constantly by TV, and they have their own simple lab, and they can talk to a tertiary care physician anytime they want to on those platforms. So Acadian. I took their medical director to Israel with me once, Ross Judice, nice guy. And Ross had been they took over New Orleans a few years ago. It was the last part of Louisiana that they took over. There were 14 separate EMS suppliers in New Orleans and the suburbs. And Katrina. And they had 10,000 victims of various kinds in the Superdome. And Ross Judice had been working, and the 7 helicopters had been working day and night for 3 days. And here came Governor Blanco, Mayor Nagel, and a bunch of FEMA officials walking on the outside of the Superdome. And Ross said, "Mr. Nagans, can I talk to you?" And he said, "I don't have any effing time for that." And Ross said, "Well then, F you." Now, for Ross Judice, a quiet, church-going individual, but he was right here. That's all he needed.
Of course,
okay.
Of course.
Anyway, he's the one who told me that story. But anyway, they had to triage those thousands, and they shipped in the 7 helicopters and as many paramedics as they could, and they went through that Superdome. And it was a hell of a
We
story.
actually sent over a lot of volunteer DMATs and units, and at one point we had to pull them back because people were shooting at them.
Yeah.
So unfortunately.
Okay. We have a, oh man,
Thank you.
aren't you nice? Thank you.
I'm fine.
Nope.
Is there anything else, since we're filming this for history, that you want the world to know? Because you have the perspective from the beginning, thoughts, ideas. Is there something really important for you to tell future generations? Because once we put this on digital, it's permanent.
Yeah.
You'll be able to talk to future generations about, here, see,
Well,
see what you did as an act of a hero.
okay.
You stepped outside the system, you did things that challenged you, and that could have got you in trouble, but you did it anyway.
Personally, I did not worry, as I remember and look back, I did not worry about my own skin. Part of the reason is in 63, 64, malpractice didn't hang very heavy over my head. It was not, I was protected by the hospital. I worked for a county entity and a university. But it never entered the equation at all.
It didn't enter my mind in
No.
the early 70s either.
No.
You know, when I wrote the protocols for Metro-Dade, I mean, you just don't think about it. It's the
Well,
right thing to do.
Yep. It was a non-factor. The fire chief worried about the image of his department, and rightly so.
Right.
And I respected that. I didn't make light of it. He had a first-rate fire department. He had spent his entire life building it, from a junior officer up.
Well, in those early days in the 70s, a lot of fire departments didn't really want to do this. There are a handful around the country that did it, the ones you were talking about. But it became a sales job from county to county and city to city to get them engaged in this idea, didn't it? That's what I saw.
There's an organization, IFC, International Association
Fire chiefs.
of Fire Chiefs.
Right.
The IFC, I attended the meetings with Larry Kenny, the national meeting, 4 straight years. And the last year in Seattle, Larry Kenny was nominated to be president of the organization. Great. And I worked for his, at the meeting, I worked for him to be nominated. But the fire chiefs in the international organization, many of them were not that interested in EMS. They were interested in the fire service, rightly so. That was their job. But EMS, to them, at that time, was a distraction,
Of course.
and it was foreign to their training.
Exactly.
Yeah,
They were older guys.
yeah.
It wasn't,
And,
wasn't what they wanted to do.
yep.
It was like they had a box of life. There was a little box that this was firefighters do. And this was a whole new avenue opening up. And nothing new goes easily.
Yeah.
Nothing new goes easily.
Yep. And of our fire chiefs in Miami, they're all gone except one district chief. But I once asked one of them, in those early days, he said, yeah, we had a couple of fire chiefs that didn't think we ought to be doing this. And I have to respect that decision.
Another piece of history that maybe I'm wrong about, but was important to me, is I think that the 5 guys that you initially trained, the 3 or 5 guys, they all went on to be leaders, bigger leaders.
Mike Criley and Len Cobb are still around. Jim Warren and Bill Grace are gone. Mark Vazu up in Grand Rapids is gone. So there's 2 out of the 5 still around.
But they helped seed the country. Didn't these
Right.
3 to 5 people go to other cities and carry on the message? They seeded the country to help start this whole thing.
Yeah. We had a lot of visitors in Miami in the early days. Fire chiefs from Dallas and
Denver, I think.
Houston
Right, Houston.
and Denver and you name it around the